So let's get going. Very excited to have you all here. We're broadening horizons today and hearing about some work from outside of the AI community, but it's nevertheless very relevant. Let's get going. Sorry, I'm getting myself on YouTube. Very excited to have. Nevertheless, very relevant to the work that many of us do. I'm very excited to introduce Professor Sera Linardi. She's an associate professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh, where she founded and directs the Center for Analytical Approaches to Social Innovation. She received her Ph.D. in social science from Caltech. Her work bridges academic research and practical challenges in the provision of public services, specifically around prosocial behavior, information aggregation, and behavioral economics of the poor. Her research has been published in economics management and political science journals and won the 2016 Midwest Political Science Association Best Paper in Comparative Politics Award. Let's give our speaker a very warm virtual welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I titled this Lessons from Imperfect Attempts to Serve Out of Academia, and you will soon see why. So let me just jump straight into it. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about what is community engaged research and talk a little bit about the differences when the focus is on research versus when the focus is on community. And then I'm going to give two examples from CAASI. So one that is driven by a specific research question, and one is, just simply saying it's driven by outrage, it's driven by emotions and passion and activism. And I'm going to try to draw lessons from there on team formation, workflow, and the impact of the work. Okay. All right, so community engaged research, there is a lot of literature on this that are not really part of the standard maybe econ literature. And so they are the CBPR and community engaged research. They integrate community partners so that you can equalize power between university and the community around. But you want to prevent research practices that historically harm communities and deepen knowledge of context, and then the social racial equity. And for me, just simply to be in it together with the community that surrounds us, the place where our schools are at, and kind of share, really share the burden of the issues, the social issues around us in the process of seeking solutions. So I bolded research here and focus on community engaged research. And there's a lot of excellent work happening all around the Poverty Action Lab in MIT, Leo, which is the research group in Notre Dame. Also, we're putting together a conference in April 2021, and the NPR Mechanism Design for Vulnerable Population Conference. And there's a lot of excellent work in this area that will be in that conference. But which community that we can engage with, what questions we ask, and how to build the research team depends on the standards of publication in academia. So an ideal partner would be one that is well-resourced, you have enough people, you have financial, you have enough financial resources, you already have a data collection structure, and then you can speak the academics language. Similarly, there is also an ideal research team, and these are teams that will maximize the likelihood that you're going to get a good publication out of this project, right? And this may be slightly different than what you need for power sharing. So this could exclude smaller local organizations that are actually maybe closest to the population that we're interested in, and researchers that have the sensitivity and the persistence to co-develop or co-learn with the community. And so this can further entrench hierarchy. And so what we want to ask here is what would happen if you put the bold on the community, if the community is the focus? And I'm going to give two examples from CAASI. So one is a randomized controlled trial that was initiated by a small nonprofit that requested we help them with impact evaluation. And another one is a civic tech tool building effort that has been initiated by the BLM activism over the summer. I'm going to talk about the impact on team compositions. In the first one, you have research assistants. In the second one, you have volunteers. And then the workflow. So in one, it's a linear workflow, roughly linear. And then the other one is a very non-linear workflow. And the output is research versus community building. Okay. So feel free to ask questions anytime. Okay, so let me just Andrew is given, thank you so much for the introduction, Andrew. So I'm just gonna say a little bit about myself, but not repeat what Andrew have said. So I come from West Borneo in Indonesia, where there's basically everything that you do should have the practical implication of the things that you do kind of stare at you in the face, right? So when something happens, people can't say, oh, this is not my expertise, I can't touch it, but you just say, what can I do in this situation? And then, so from there, I worked on computer science and then was in Adobe Systems for a while before I went to get my PhD. And then I had experience doing interdisciplinary research and doing kind of practice to research, research to practice at the Yahoo CISL lab. But I think the most impactful experience for this has been being a math tutor for an organization that matches mentors with homeless children called School on Wheels in LA. So you guys probably, from LA probably know this, maybe Millen knows this organization. So what I cared about was the children that was in these organizations. We saw how they move from school to school, we saw how their education has been interrupted. And I wanted to learn about them and I wanted to have them be more a part of my academic life. But as I asked myself then, what I was able to do as a quantitative social scientist, it became more complicated, whether I could learn about this area of my interest or not. So I'm going to talk about kind of the quantitative social scientist process. And for that, I'm going to borrow from Andrew and Millen's paper, the data to deployment pipeline in AI for social impact workflow. And I'm going to try to talk about our process using this workflow. So first, you have the immersion process where you make contact and you spend time in the field. Then you have the data collection process where you ask who is the target, what information do they have, what actions are they able to do, what are the cost of their actions, what's the budget constraint. And then you create a model which talks about how the agents make decisions. You hypothesize intervention. So in our case, when we do experiments, we're going to think about the intervention. We do power calculation, et cetera, to figure out the sample size that we need to be recruiting. And then when we do the implementation, we collect results, and then we communicate through papers and talks. Right? So that's kind of the standard way. So if I was interested in the effect of mentoring on children that are experiencing homelessness, I need to collect data, but the data did not exist. And this is often the case for vulnerable populations. If I want to write a predictive model, I am not an expert in this domain, and it takes multiple experts, right? You need someone in education, you need someone in childhood, you need someone with adverse childhood experiences. This is a very, very specialized area. If I try to think about the intervention, I have to understand institutional knowledge about how homeless shelters operate, how they coordinate with schools, and what are the rights of mentors versus parents. And then when I do the power calculation, most of the organizations that I work with won't pass that bar, right? They simply are just not big enough. So for example, the shelter that I worked with had about 30 people living there, and some of them are in clusters because they're families. And for the field tests, I need funding. I need to be able to monitor what the nonprofit is doing. They need to trust me. They need to have some technical ability to collect data, and they need to have stability in leadership so they don't keep changing CEOs or managers. And then in the communication stage, I can't just wait a couple of years to publish my paper. I need to be able to provide the nonprofit with short-term output, right? So I was only able to do one thing. So I did not do this research. And instead, I changed my focus to something that's easier to study. Okay. So, so because I had to publish a paper, this was me in grad school, I looked instead at the volunteers that were quitting early. So some volunteers came and then they left early. And now, because the volunteers were graduate students like me or college students, then I can recruit a convenient sample. I put them in an experimental environment so I can initialize the environment. And then I can find models from the literature that I'm familiar with, in this case, prosocial signaling. And then I can do, my intervention does not have to be something that is institutionally situated, but just has to be situated in the literature, right? And then for implementation, I have control in my lab. And then for the communication, because I've decoupled this from the nonprofit's mission, I can publish this when I need to, which was like 2 years later, right? Okay, so I could do all of them. And so I got a paper out of it, right? But this is what I care about, and this is what I'm able to do, right? So I am internally dissatisfied with this disconnect. There's this disconnect, right? And then why? And I'm sure a lot of you guys here also experience this. So why is it so hard to do what we care about? Okay, so connecting community and research is difficult because in publications, of course, I'm only talking about like my experience and in a particular area of economics. You care about precise tests of theoretical hypotheses, and so the main relationship is with academics. While when we think about social innovation, social impact, what you care about is you take academic work as building blocks, and then you try to build a prototype out of it, right? It's like Legos. And so things that play together well are the things that can build something. And the main relationship is the relationship with the end users, right? But a person has 24 hours a day and you have to choose, right? And then we have to, like, I don't know, support our family and do stuff like that. So then we choose the things that we have incentives for, right? So what is rewarded in our papers and talks and in the pipeline, theoretical models that models how agents make decisions in itself is rewarded, right? But if we want to do community engagement, what is needed is a lot more, and they're invisible. You need meeting spaces and co-learning spaces, right, where community people can get together. You need preliminary data collection, including like small scale pilots that are probably too small to make like a, you know, like a high ranked publication. You need to sit together with expert in related fields and figure out like simple models, like what are building blocks in our models that can play together well. You need to write up the context, the conflict that you have when you're thinking of interventions, the trade-offs between potential interventions and the institution where this is situated in. You need to build long-term partnerships with the community and then with the experts in the other disciplines, because you're going to be doing this building block build with them. And then you have to synthesize the results, and then you have to value output, intermediate output, such as civic technology, right? Something for our partners as well. So what can we do? We could create an infrastructure so we can provide those things that are in the bottom that is needed for researchers to center their work on community, but is right now not incentivized, right? So we do this in two ways. We have a practice to research process at CAASI, and then we have a community volunteering platform that is called Grief to Action. And ideally, we're not there yet. Projects from the volunteering platform can potentially go through the practice to research process and then become research. But we only started in fall 2019, so we're not there yet. Okay, so the Center for Analytical Approach to Social Innovation at Pitt has a practice to research process that is, you know, kind of it kind of works like this. So we have a space that holds regular engagement for community partners to hear their issues and like learn about institutional context. And then we identify the building blocks or like quantitative models that we can build out of the issues. And then we identify disciplines that together can form sub-teams that can work on these sub-questions, right? So we respect disciplinary incentives. And then we're in charge of integrating the findings and bringing it back to the engagement space. So some of our partners are like the local community. We focuses on low-wage workers. For example, we work with the Restaurant Opportunity Center and SEIU, and then we work with people who experience in the criminal justice system, such as Foundation of Hope, which is the partner I'll talk to you about later, and Take Action Mon Valley. And then for the local services, we primarily work with human services, and we had a grant on transit, and so we work with transit as well. And a big partner that's always like super supportive has been the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center. And we work across the campus, and also a lot with MD4SG is a big source of our inspiration. So we work with social work, with business school, with Sky, and with GSPIA, and we're funded by NSF, Rappaport, Pitt Cyber, and the Heinz Endowment. So just little pieces from different places. Like we're not, we don't have an endowed thing for the center, but we have project specific and grants. Okay. So this was the chart that I showed you about the invisible things that need to happen for us to center our work on community. And so for the next thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to walk you through a sample project. And this is a field experiment on encouraging the use of reentry services for people who have been previously incarcerated. And here what I want to emphasize is just those two bolded areas, which is doing small scale, starting with organization for setting up an experiment with them, and then creating a long-term partnership with like a smaller nonprofit. Okay. All right. So the motivation, as we know, the criminal, there's a lot of people in the American criminal justice system, and it's not a cheap system, nor is it a system that works. So from people that have been released from jail, 1/3 is rearrested within 6 months, 45% is rearrested within a year, 60% in 2 years, and 2/3 in 3 years, right? So this is a terrible, terrible rate of return. And it's $30,000, about $30,000 estimate a year for a person's incarceration, okay? So there must be a better way. And people talk about reentry services, helping people who've left jail find a new way to reintegrate with society. So the reentry support services have a large variation in prices. It could be as low as $400 up to like $25,000. And one of the services that is most often discussed is employment, but the evidence so far has been mixed and it hasn't been encouraging. So the Cook et al. Meta-analysis says like employment, at least the type that would be reported to your probation officer, is not a big part of this population's life. So what can we do instead? There's other literature that's shown that treatment that build interpersonal relationships are more effective. And but it's hard to build interpersonal relationship when you underutilize the services. And underutilization of services among vulnerable population is a big issue and is common across a large range of services. So for example, this Bhargav and Manoli paper looked at EITC payments. So that's literally money, and money that wasn't claimed, money that was left on the table that would be very useful for vulnerable populations. Okay. So that's the same thing happened to that also happened to our partner, Foundation of Hope. So Foundation of Hope has 2 programs. They have a program, a pre-release program at the Allegheny County Jail, where they try to help people who are incarcerated prepare for life outside of jail. And that program has been evaluated by DHS. They have a smaller program outside of jail called an aftercare program that hasn't been evaluated, and they provide short-term and long-term services. So the short-term services are like emergency food, clothing, transportation, and the long-term ones are like mentorship, employment, like family, help, etc. So at the time when we met them, which is 2016, they didn't have very much data, and so when we were working with them to try to get partners to work with all of us, for example, we approach like a probation offices, and they say, okay, we need proof that this service work, and we say we don't have that. That's why we're doing this. And they say, yeah, but we only work with services that we know work. And so it's like, how do you start with that catch-22, right? So so then we decided to work with Foundation of Hope and try to do this impact evaluation for them, even though the other partners that we approached wasn't willing to do that. And in 2015, 2016, we saw that they had the same problem that we often see, which is there is a large number of people came once and then they don't come back. right? And they don't say, like, when we talk to them later, we don't say that they're not satisfied. They just got busy. Like, life after jail is just really messy and has a lot of constraints, and so people just don't come back. Okay, so the hypothesis is that monetary incentives for visit can help people put their attention into their reentry program, and can work to encourage utilization of the services. Other things are also, it could be costly to get to the program. You have to ride a bus and then get to the office. But by coming, you can build relationship with the caseworkers, and then you start relying on a different network for your needs rather than the previous network that might have resulted in the previous criminal record. And then following that, the hypothesis that more utilization will reduce recidivism. Okay. So the timeline. So in 2016, we decided to work together, and so I went and talked to some collaborators. And Marco Castillo and Robin Petrie at Texas A&M is a co-author on this project. They joined us, and then we looked for grants. We applied for IRBs, and then we start hiring research assistants. And it took a while, and then we finally started to experiment in fall 2018, and we did our power calculation using the results of the program inside of the jail. And so our goal was to recruit 750 people. So Foundation of Hope is blind to the experimental assignments. They were part of the design process, but they do not know which client is assigned to what treatment. We do all the administration of the experiment. And then the experiment was ongoing and recruitment was ongoing until COVID. And then after COVID, we switched over to thinking about the arrest records. And that in itself is a whole story that I can tell you guys later. Okay. All right, so let me talk about the experimental treatment. But maybe let me just talk about experimental treatment and take some questions here. So we used Foundation of Hope's. So the goal is to increase utilization of services and to provide monetary incentives for people to come use the services more often. And the goal was to come 5 times. So that's the reference point. So this is their original business card. And then we added on the bottom of it, please aim to use at least 5 services a year. And then we modified the business card a little bit. We provided like 5 little boxes there. There's like a punch card kind of model. And there's 2 of them, one where you have to fill in all the punches and then get a $50 gift certificate. And one where it has been, 2 of them have been pre-filled. And so you only need to fill in 3 to get a $50 gift certificate. Okay. So this was the idea of Jody Rayford, who is Foundation of Hope, right? So we really very much take on our community partners' ideas of what they think work with their population here and the level of incentive that they think will work for the population. Okay, so before I get to the results, maybe I should pause and take a couple of questions first.
So let me jump in here by saying all that you've said resonates so well with our experience. So thank you for highlighting some of these issues. And it almost seems like there needs to be a space where all these experiences are gathered together, published in some way. And I wonder if you've done that already, or because this is a lot of effort, and just like you pointed out, it's like work that is not, this is such important work to sort of establish contact, to go through all of, but the things that get published are like the 2. The pieces perhaps that are not even the most time-consuming portions of the work.
Right. Yeah, we would be happy to learn about how we could publish this or like work together. That would be wonderful. Yeah, Okay, do you guys have other questions? Okay, So if there isn't other questions, I'm going to show you guys preliminary results, but this is just preliminary. And, my point here is like more of the big picture than like the results itself. So I'll just kind of go through it, not too long, not take too long there. Okay, so results so far, right? Again, we didn't get to the sample size that we wanted because of COVID. So what we saw was that the first row is the no incentive treatment, and you have about two visits per person in the no incentive treatment. We had 165 people there. And then in the one where you get $50 after 3 visits, we increased the number of visits significantly. And the $50 one, we did not increase it significantly. So you could see here that 51% of the participant in the 3 visit get incentive treatment actually managed to get the incentive. They got to 3 visits or more, and then they won the $50. And then in the 5 visits or more, 20% of people got to that point and got the incentive. Okay. So far, we don't see an effect on arrest rate. So the standard errors are big here. So the rearrest rate are here, and they're not significantly different from each other. Okay. But when we look closer, now Foundation of Hope has the data to just kind of look at what kind of services are being requested, for example. So here, you could see that we rank this visits and we rank the kinds of services by short-term to long-term. And so here you can see that transportation and clothing, which are short-term services, are going down through the visits, while long-term things like employment and mentorship's the social one, are going up. So it seems like there's a shift in the kinds of things that people are demanding as they start forming relationships. This is controlled for by how long they've been out of jail. So this is not like because they just left jail, they need transportation. Okay. Another thing that we are able to do now is also we are able to look at rearrest by time after enrollment. So you saw in the chart earlier that there's a real time trend to rearrest. And so here you see that 2 months after being in Foundation of Hope, people have about like a 4% chance of being rearrested, and then about 6 months in, they have an 8% chance of being rearrested, and here about like 15% chance after a year. Right? So what I'm going to show you is the treatment effect on I3 and I5, right? Not the rearrest rate itself, but the treatment effect, so additional on top of this. So here you see that like even though we don't pass 0 here, but there seems to be like a slight downward trend in like a short-term duration that we don't see with the I5, right? So potentially there is a medium-term effect, and the size of this medium-term effect was similar to the result of the in-jail evaluation. So this is exciting, but again, this is very preliminary, but it just sort of shows that now Foundation of Hope has sort of the pieces of the data that is necessary for them to like build a case to funders and to evaluators about what it is that they're doing.
Just a quick clarification question here. So I5 is the card where they fill in all the 5 before getting incentive. So what is it correct to read this as I3 is more, more of the money, or rather people do visit 3 times, you got a 51% success rate, but it doesn't seem to be as and it leads to less rearrest. Is that what?
Yeah, right. This is the rearrest rate. So low is good. Yes.
Wonderful.
Okay. So lessons that we learned from this was that smaller community organization has this catch-22 with data and with the data-driven impact evaluation thing. And we get to learn a lot about the population, and we get to help smaller organizations by helping them with this initial process. We can have community partners not only be part of the design process, but also part of the research talk. So for example, these are the COOs, the deacons, caseworkers that were in Foundation of Hope as part of our research talk. So they show up, and then they could bring their expertise to our academic audience as well. Another lesson that we learned is that, we started in 2016, and they were quite small then. And so it's like we grew up together. We've both sort of, we've both expanded since then. And like we ran through a lot, and we're now like all committed to each other, right? So this is very nice. Okay. So that's my RCT experience, and some lessons on the community engagement there. And that one is more standard. Like, you'll probably see more of that process. So now I'm going to go to the community volunteering platform, and that's to warn you, that's a messier process, right? Okay. All right. So Grief to Action Workspace is our community volunteering platform, and it started basically organically after George Floyd's killing in May 2020. So basically, I just sent out an email. Everybody was emotional, and then I just sent out an email and say like, hey, do you guys want to propose a data project? And then people just came, and people asked other people to come, and it's just all word of mouth. And then at this point, we have about 100 people have participated in Grief to Action. We just meet every Fridays. And these are student or staff or community initiated projects against systemic racism. Right now, we have 35 people in 2 working groups. One is around supporting Black-owned businesses, and the other one is about understanding police union contracts. And the faculty roles here are to support the initiatives. So it's kind of an inverted shape here. So the sample project that I'm going to talk to you guys about is the police accountability tool. And the 2 things that I'm going to talk about is like this immersion process, creating a meeting and co-learning space, and the communication process, which is creating a data visualization tool, a civic technology a tool to help for the community needs. Okay. All right. So at first I'm going to talk about the meeting space, and then what kind of conversations happen there, and how that becomes like an actual plan to create a tool. Okay. All right. So students, alumni, and staff that are broadly interested in policing met at the platforms, which is just Zoom. And then local government representatives started joining. And then they talked to us about how the city is in a hard place because union contracts limit the ability of the city to enforce for police accountability. And then people do not trust the local government because of that. They think they don't care. So then our volunteers started reaching out to a community organization, like the anti-violence community organizations. And then they got invited to their meetings. We could show up in their meetings, and then we meet other groups at their meetings, right? So it's just sort of like one meeting to another meeting. And then they came to our meeting, and they start talking about the union contracts themselves, and talk about how they're never sure what police they're dealing with, because policing is extremely fragmented. So you could walk a mile away from where you are here and then be in a different police jurisdiction. So they never know who, there's a lot of cross-jurisdiction confusion, and they requested our help in getting the union contracts for our local county. Okay, so our volunteer says, let's do this. They make data collection plan. They attended Freedom of Information Act training, and they're all ready to do this. They learned that there's 130 police agencies in our county. Like, our small county has 130. And I think somebody here probably know better than me, but I think in the US there's like, something like more than 10,000. It's like 40 something. It's thousands of police departments. Okay, so we're ready for this. And then the local government representative came back to some other meeting and says like, hey, you shouldn't be submitting this right to know request, because they could sour relationships. Like, we're part of a university and we have all these units. And then once you start hitting people with RTKs, they're gonna think you're not nice and then won't work with us anymore. So why don't you just ask them? We're like, oh, okay, we're just gonna go ask them. So then the volunteers readjust their data collection and say, here's all the contact information that you can use to personally ask for contacts nicely, right? And then once we start doing this, we learn that we can get it, but it can't be shared with our community organizations. So this is how it goes. Back and forth between immersion and collecting data, and we talk to some people, and then back and forth, and then some other people showed up, and then we start going back and forth between collection and immersion. And basically, in our volunteer platform, because we're open to all, it's hard to identify who's gonna come, right? So we're at a certain stage, we have a certain conversation, and then some of our members are like, wait, I need to call this person, and then they get someone else to join. But because we don't pre-select, I mean, we did pre-select in the beginning, then it's hard to control, but in some ways, the people that come are the people that are really, really interested in what's going on at that stage. And in the data collection project, what we learned is that politics and coalition determine what is public data. Right? Like you could think something is public, but it's not that easy to get, and getting it has consequences, right? So that's what we learned. So there's just a lot of back and forth there. Okay, so in the end, so this is the start of this nonlinear process. In the end, we say, okay, we can't get local government contracts, so let's just go to available contracts, and then let's just do what we can there. So we go to available contracts, and our volunteers read a whole bunch of contracts, and then they did qualitative work and traced out the police investigation process map. After they traced it out, they made a video and they made it available, right? So there is a complaint process, and then there's a notification process where the officer is notified that there's a complaint against them. There's the investigation that happened. There is a conviction process, and then they get disciplinary action or not, or reprimands, and then there's the record keeping process. Okay, so we have this video, and then we talk to the community that, you know, this is the process, and they say this is really useful. Can we have a website for it? Can we have a way we can walk people through this? And then the local government people come in and they say, look, if you can tailor this to locality, we can offer it to our citizens. So then we all have common knowledge, and they don't say, hey, you're not doing this because you don't care about us. They now understand what the process is. And our hands are tied in certain ways, but our hands are not tied in other ways. And this is what needs to be changed, right? So it creates a ground for communication to start. Okay, we're like, right. So let's now make sure we don't overwrite someone else's tool that's out there. So the volunteers go out, they look at like existing tools. So like Check the Police and like other tools that are available online. And then we go to Campaign Zero, who has a national union contract database. We talk to them, we say, can we use your data? And they say yes. And then we start sketching out the basic functionality. Okay, so now here we are like, we're going to build the tool, right? So then we talk to the faculty and we say, hey, how do we get programmers? And they say, why don't we make this a computer science capstone? And we're like, okay. So then we make computer science capstone. Computer science student joined us, right? Okay. So now we want to build a tool. We have a programmer and we have data, right? So now we're at the point where we have to make a model about how the agents make decisions. And then there you go. You have another back and forth model. So different stakeholders have different models of behavior, right? So the different community members that are with us are dealing with a different segment of the population, which has different needs. So this is what we thought at first, but every time we look, it got deeper. So when we talk to the local government, there's a question of, should you even complain? Are you cutting off other avenues when you file a complaint? And then there's a question of, there is multiple channels in the complaint process. Which one are you following? Which one will you be modeling? And then there's different requirements in different geographical localities. Somehow you have to come into the office. Some you have to get notarized forms. And then when we look deeper and we start talking to community organizations, we learn that there's even a deeper layer, which is, do people, citizens, do they even know if they have a complaint? Do they know what their rights are when they're interacting with the police? And then we start looking at victims of police violence versus people who make complaints. And then we start having questions of, are some people too vulnerable to even complain? So that's why we have all this back and forth, but I would say that it's a very valuable back and forth. And then I'm not going to go through this. I'm not going to show much example for this, but basically we also, other things that we might face is that politics and coalition will also determine what kind of interventions are feasible in the implementation process. Once you have, like in the future with grants and people who are getting credit or not getting credit, then changing something from a public process to something that is a resource process could get tricky. And then in the communication process, in the future, there might be differences in how stakeholders want to message this, right? So overall, this public participation process is complex and nonlinear. So The good thing is it requires us to rapidly build prototypes and get feedback. So because we have a computer science capstone class, there's also deadlines associated with that. And so the prototype got built very rapidly. So this is what we built with our program manager, Eliana and Michaela, and the computer science capstone team, Connor, Isabella, and Robert. They're master's student at GSPIA and bachelor student at Sky Pitt. And there's many other volunteers, right? These are just some of the work people who contributed. So we have a tool for researcher and a tool for citizens. And the tool for researchers allow people to search the contracts by keyword and view the contracts by city. So for example, if I'm trying to look up how fees and expenses of investigation are distributed, I can search for fees and expenses, and I can see that Cincinnati and Cleveland both have the city and the other party bear the fees, right? And then we also have the misconduct complaint tool. This is for the citizen. So you could select a city, and then you can get to, when you click on interaction here, you can see an FAQ that tells you questions that you might have at the stage where you're interacting with the police. And then you can go through it, and it tells you, it walks you through the complaint process. The FAQ was written by our volunteers. The answers were also written by our volunteers. So we don't make this public yet because we need to actually have law school students like walk through this and like read it and make sure that everything is accurate. Okay. So that is our community volunteering platform and our public participation in creating that. The lessons that I learned from this was that if you open it up to public participation throughout the process, it will necessarily be nonlinear. But the nonlinearity is necessarily a part of it, because some of the people that were interested in the process midway wasn't interested in the beginning because we had nothing to show then, right? So you will necessarily be attracting different people throughout the process. And it is very valuable because every time we go through this, we learn a new perspective that alert us to a potential harm or a reason something won't be adopted or a political context that is hard to know ahead of time. So managing this nonlinearity and shielding some members of the group so that they can do their work without being caught in this loop is a skill that should be taught for social impact programs, for policy schools. I don't know what to call it. Maybe there's a name for it already, but this is something that should be taught and is very valuable. And we're very thankful for our program managers for having this skill. And looking through all of this, because this is an AI talk after all, I have to draw some things about how AI can help. So some distinct things I see is that getting supposedly public data is very difficult. There is very small units of access to government, and they're fragmented. Each of them has websites with user interface that is hard to decipher, and then they're laborious to use. For example, our data, our court data for arrest data was a like one-by-one lookup. You have to type the name exactly right. You have to type the date of birth exactly right. And then certain things that you're supposed to be able to do actually has political consequences. So this is getting the data. Outputting the data, contributing the data is also very complicated, it turns out. Right, so it's for example, the complaint process, which contributes to the database of complaints, is different for each locality. There's multiple unclear steps. You have to go through different websites to do this. So at first we thought it would be simple, and then someone could web scrape and then find some keyword and then kind of sequence the steps in different localities. But it turns out that these steps are embedded in links and PDF and links and like scanned documents, and it's just it was very difficult. And also, contributing this data may have political consequences. Like if you make a complaint, your identity might be revealed. And these are all not entirely clear in the beginning. So naively, how AI can help here is some automatic like organizing, publishing, and pool of these public data and automatic filing of data to this public process would be extremely valuable and would shield individuals from the potential consequences they can have out of pulling this data or contributing what they should be able to contribute. And how you can, I hope this will kind of inspire some people to join us. We have a conference that's coming up with Thomas Senholm will give the keynote. And then I'm going to drop the link there for the schedule and the registration. So this is mechanism design. There's much more theory there. There's much more quantitative work there. And we also still have research to practice sessions. Grief to Action meet every Friday at 11 o'clock, and we're open to everyone. If you sign up in the Zoom link, if you sign up in this link, we'll send you a Zoom link. And that's it. And this is us. We are and our partners. And we thank you for this opportunity for being here.
Thank you for coming. It was a great talk.
Thank you.
Sure we have questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for this talk. I really think that the role of CAASI sort of bridging these 2 points between practitioners and researchers is absolutely essential and something that is completely lacking in academia. My question is, so what do you find to be the best approach in making this successful in terms of who is actually sort of at that central point? Like, do you want sort of social science researchers? Do you want domain experts? Do you want academics? Do you need all of them combined? Do you need more program administrators? What are sort of the people challenges that are necessary at that sort of central junction?
That's a really good question. I think we need different people at different stages, right? So, for example, I've taken the leadership role in like the initial formulation of this, and then the program managers are now like leading their own groups. And then as we're programming this thing, now we have computer science faculty that are like coming in, law school faculty that are coming in, and we'll start to take more and more of a role. So I would say that those people that are able to manage this nonlinear process, and then also understand that there are parts of the group that just needs to kind of work linearly and needs to get the information fed to them at different points as necessary. Those are the really, really crucial roles.
There's a question in the chat here, multiple parts. The first is, did your research include any specific consideration of municipal state use of algorithmic tools in criminal justice, e.g. predictive policing?
We did not, but I know that the CMU, the CMU group that we talked to looked at that, and Data for Black Lives also are looking into that. So I could give you guys contact information to those parties.
And the second question from the chat is, do you anticipate that this research will inform policy decisions going forward? And if so, how?
Policy decision going forward. I'm going to drop the URL to our meeting here. So I think that's really early, and it's hard for me to say anything there. We just want to provide information that should be public in a form that should be digestible, right? Like, these are information that allows people to participate in the civic process, and they're impossible to read. I mean, yesterday I just had a kid who, was begging for money to pay for restitution. Like, he's like a 17-year-old kid. He was walking around and he was he needs $50 to pay for restitution because his workplace shut down, and he's $130 behind, and he's been walking around town trying to get someone to like listen to him. And then he had his restitution paper with him, and he's like, I'm not lying. Like, look at this, right? Like, I'm really, like, it's due today. I'll go back to jail, like, not because I did something, because I can't pay. And so we're like, all right, let's pay this. Let's look this up. So I went online, I went to the thing, and I said, do you know your docket number? He's like, no. Do you know your, no, I don't remember what it's called, but like, there are other numbers that you could put in. Do you know your offense date? No. Do you know which court you were in? Not really. And then we looked at the website, and we're just like, so, like, there's just so many roadblocks for people to participate that if we had a way of uniformizing this, right? And if you go to a different state, if you go to a different city, it's different again. So why does this have to be so hard? I think that's primarily my what we're trying to do. Like, this should not be this hard.
So there's some notion here that the system, you know, there's supposedly this information is available to the public. Supposedly anyone can file a complaint and the fees are handled sensibly, but for the kind of populations that are involved here, those supposedlys really aren't carrying much weight, and there's a lot of friction, which is sort of closing the door.
Yes. Very, very costly for them to figure out.
Hi, I'm Eliana. I'm one of the program managers, and I just wanted to add on a little bit to one of those the question about policy. One thing that we haven't pursued too much so far, but that I'm excited about, is we are considering trying to put together like a best practices guide to suggest better ways of negotiating contracts that makes it more fair for the citizens. So that's something that, not related to AI, but that is something that we do hope to maybe down the road have some real effects at the municipal level.
Did I answer the question, Kenny?
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't sure if I should unmute, but I'm at least not hiding behind an off video right now. And just for a bit of context, I was a longtime Pittsburgher, worked there on AI for social good initiatives for the last 6 years, but recently moved to Cambridge, and I'm at the Harvard Kennedy School studying public policy. But this is a very important subject for me, and I know that there's a lot of stakeholders throughout Pittsburgh and the state who are very committed to trying to figure out these equations. So yeah, thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
I'm going to be terrible and speak again. But excuse me. One thing I want to add, I think Lily, you might have asked something about like balancing the different types of roles, and I think that was Lily. Yeah, one thing that I think about a lot when I think about grief to action is how I come completely from a humanities background. I never, ever thought I'd be part of something that would be talked about at an AI conference. But here I am. And so, and that happened because of the way that Sera approaches things, that it really was like, what can we do to help? And that drew in everybody, not like, please help with social innovation necessarily, but like coming from this place of like, how do we help? And I think like that's how we drew in so many different kinds of people, and how it keeps going, because we're all united by this passion, even though we have really different skills.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why we need to be kind of honest about community engaged research. Like, how much focus do we put on research versus community engagement? And I think partners also feel that, like, if they think that in the end trade-offs would be made that kind of leave them where they don't want to be putting resources into, right? So I think there is that's why I think like we have this platform that is volunteering, and then if something was going to be a research project, like we have like a process of like transitioning it to a research project. That might be important. I mean, we're still in the very beginning stages, right? Like this started organically this summer, and the center itself started last fall. So yeah.
I guess I'll kind of re-ask a version of Millen's question from the middle. I noticed from the second part, I didn't see PhD students in your group mentioned. It's scary as a PhD student to sign on to this kind of thing because you're worried about producing the papers you need, especially if you want to go into academia.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guiding them away from this?
We have PhD students. We have a reading group that is like basically, with like OR, econ. So for example, they were thinking about like one of the other projects is the Black Business Project, and they're thinking, and one problem is that if you bring in more people to support businesses, they might be over capacity, right? So they're looking at like two-sided matching with capacity constraint in this case. So there's ways of making it formal. And then in the other one, we are also thinking about, like right now, it's we do random subsidies in our work with the Foundation of Hope. But another question is like, is some sort of personalized subsidy or subsidy that's targeted at a certain sequence in their interaction with Foundation of Hope, is that better? So all of those can be very technical questions.
Okay, so I guess we can wrap up there. Thanks again to our speakers. It was a really great talk, and I learned a lot about the work you've done and how to think about these kind of problems. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for Grief to Action and all our community partners. It was very, very valuable to have this experience. It was a gift, and thanks to Harvard for having us. Have a good week, everyone, and join us.